the return. Okay. If you invest in a CD, then whatever interest rate the CD is paying, that's what you will get based on the calculations. If you invest in the stock market, if the stock prices go up, whatever the increase in the stock value is, that increase will be shown as income, and so on. So income is generated typically from investments, whatever they might be. Capital, on the other hand, is not generated from investments. Capital is either the initial assets that were put into the trust at the beginning, or or capital is any new assets that may be added to the existing assets within the trust. So let's say you start a trust with $10 million cash, and then for some reason you want to put in an additional capital of 17 million because you won the lottery, then that 17 million would not be considered income because it's not generated from any investment. It's being added directly to the trust by the settlor. And so we refer to that as capital. Nice little thing to remember in the trust world, because income and capital are as wide spoken as discretionary and non-discretionary, as wide spoken as the prudent man investment process, as wide spoken as discretionary versus non-discretionary trusts. So all of these things are very common, typical expressions that you will find in the world of trust. So then let us then have a look at what these express powers are. Now we know that even from part one, that if in a trust deed something is expressed, that means it's actually written down. Okay? Anybody remembers the opposite of express?
Is it implied?
Okay, implied. There's another word we also use in addition to implied. Anybody remembers that word? If it's not written, it's. If it's not written, it's. Starts with V. Verbal. Okay. Anytime we're talking about an express trust, we're talking about a trust that is in writing. Anytime we're talking about a trust that is not expressed, it's typically a what we call a verbal situation. Now, can we have a verbal trust in law? Yes, you can. You can prove it. Somebody's allowed to verify it and all that stuff. But nobody wants to recommend a verbal trust. Back in the old days, again, it was verbal. Somebody gave you their word. I'll keep it. And if you don't come back, sir, I promise, I swear on a stack of Bibles that your family will get whatever assets you have. That was the verbal contract trust. Now all things have changed. Nobody trusts anybody in setting up a trust. So we say the trustee must be in writing at all times to avoid any kind of confusion. Okay, for sure. All right. I've already talked too much. Thank you very much for that. Let's see. Deandra, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent, Deandra. So now that we know all this crazy stuff about the power to invest, now, a lot of you guys may not be directly involved in the investment process at this stage of your career because you just like itsy bitsy blah blah blah. And even when you become senior trust officers, the investment arm of things may not necessarily fall within your portfolio as part of the administration. Typical professional trustees tend to have an investment department in some cases who handles all the investment issues. So again, you may not be directly involved in unless you work in the investment department, but certainly you need to be aware of these things as a trust officer so that you can have the discussion about them, so that you can put things in perspective and be on the edge of what's going on because you understand the language of the trustee and the language of the beneficiary and the language of anybody else who has something to say, including the protector. Okay? You cannot be an effective trust officer without knowing and being aware of these kinds of information. Even if you're not directly involved in making investments in the stock market, the bonds market, or whatever investment you're trying to do with this money, you still will be dealing with these matters in one form or another. Okay, Deandra, let it rip. What are some of these express powers of investment?
It is a general principle of trust law that express powers of investment within the trust instrument will be construed by the court according to the ordinary and natural meaning of the words used. Under the equitable principle
Huh?
that he who asserts must prove, a trustee wishing to argue that a particular investment falls within an express clause within the trust instrument must prove that it actually does.
Okay, keep going.
A typical general investment power within a trust instrument is set out below. Any monies requiring investment hereunder may be invested in or upon any such investments of whatsoever nature, and wheresoever situate, and whether producing income or not, including the purchase of any immovable or movable or any interest therein, as the trustee shall in its discretion think fit, without being limited by any specific powers expressed therein. There are certain investment clauses which also give trustees the power to vary investments, which is said to be an implicit power nonetheless. A power of investment which requires the consent of a third party may also be allowed.
Before she go,
However,
sorry, before you go on, Deandra, who do you think that third party could possibly be in the trust world? As far as
the
the
beneficiary,
maybe, who else?
the protector,
And perhaps more so the protector. Okay, more so the protector than the beneficiaries. As a matter of fact, trustees try to keep the beneficiaries out of these issues because beneficiaries don't always understand what's going on, but they could create a lot of confusion if you're not careful. But yes, certainly the protector could be that person, that third party, who has to give consent for every investment type activity, or perhaps certain types, or perhaps an investment over a certain amount. All right. And so all of these things, if the settler so requires, or the trustee so desires, that they would have to put all of these things in writing so that everybody can be guided accordingly, such that if something goes wrong, we can find out who should take the blame. All right, keep going.
however, such a power may not have any fiduciary obligations attached to it due to its very nature, unless the context within which the clause appears requires it. For income generation, the trustee must invest in investments where the capital value does not fluctuate, but the rate of interest may vary with the economic circumstances, such as cash or invest in corporate bonds. If they decide to invest cash, trustees must be mindful of the reputation and stability of the financial institution that they are investing and the rates of interest being paid on this cash investment. Though there may be an inclination to invest in financial institutions with higher or more competitive interest rates, it is important that the protection and preservation
Yeah, go ahead. That's right.
preservation of the cash investment take priority, as the fiduciary nature of a trustee's duties is dependent upon their actions in preserving trust property in the best interest of the beneficiaries.
Okay, stick a pin again, Deandra, because you're saying all kinds of crazy and good stuff. that persons in trust need to know. And I need to say while I remember. Notice we are told that it is important that the protection and preservation of the trust is always being considered under any circumstances with any type of investment, and that preservation and protection takes priority over what potential return you can get. You see, sometimes some investments appear to be so juicy, okay, that you figured you're gonna put all kinds of money into it without even sometimes checking it properly or even expecting things or anticipating what could go wrong. And therefore, not only do you lose the return on the investment or the money you thought you would make, but if things really go bad, you may lose some or all of the initial capital investment of the trust. So depending on how much is involved, you put like $5 million, and for some trusts, that's maybe small. And then not only do you not make any money on the 5 million, but the market has gone so poorly or the investment turns out so badly that you lose the return as well as the initial $5 million. No beneficiary wants to hear that, even if you have a legitimate case that the market crashed or whatever your excuse is. They don't want to hear that. If you try to tell a beneficiary that, they will say through their lawyers, see, they love lawyers. Because remember, if a beneficiary can sue you, they can get you to pay the legal fees, they can get you to pay whatever they thought they lost, and they can make a case, especially if they don't like you as a trustee, believe it or not. All these things go on. Because wherever people are, all these things go on. Okay? A trust is no different. Okay? They can then like say, hey, we're suing you, pay us, and now we don't want you to be our trustees anymore. Because we can't have you mad at us for suing you and doing all kinds of God knows what. So the thing that starts off innocently, if you're not following the rules and taking care to be aware and to be submissive to words like protection and preservation, we could find ourselves as trustees in big trouble. Not only should preservation and protection occur, but it should take priority because the nature of the trustee's duty is very much dependent, and the continuance of that duty is very much contingent on the preservation of the trust property. No matter how well the investment might look, stop and think as a trustee before you leap. If your investment manager is some big old enthusiastic guy that thinks he's an investment genius and he wants to play around with your trust money, tell him, Frank, I've known you for a long time, and you don't want Frank, who you've known anyway, to do it. Because when people know you, they do funny stuff like that. But nevertheless, tell him, look, this is not my bloody money. I'm guided by the prudent man concept, Frank. And maybe you don't know what I mean. I don't care. Don't mess around with these people's money. Make wise investments, and I need to know every move you make in case I need to make a decision about these investments and maybe even make a decision about Frank continuing as an investment manager. Okay? All right, sorry, Deandra, keep going. You said all that, Audra, believe it or not.
Mhm. To encourage capital growth in relation to the trust fund, trustees may wish to invest in fixed interest securities or stocks, debentures, or shares of publicly traded companies, since they provide long-term growth and stability that is advantageous to the increasing capital for capital beneficiaries.
So now notice how things slide in subtly. Some investments will generate income, and other investments in stocks and bonds, etc., will generate capital. So now we have a trustee whose primary responsibility is preservation and protection, and who has to use all angles of the market to generate income and capital wherever possible to enhance and increase the trust fund. And make no mistake, some beneficiaries are well versed. Some of them just want the money. They don't care what the hell else is going on. Just every month, a quarter, a year, give me my money. and the devil with anything else, unless somebody tells me something. But there are other beneficiaries who are investors themselves, who are tracking the market, tracking everything you do as a trustee. And when they come in those investment meetings, they come ready to see if you as a trustee have carried out your primary responsibility. How about that? So when I say there's never a dull moment, most of you may not have gotten into that aspect or been in that environment yet, but in due season, for one reason or another, you will find yourself in it. And the more information you have to work with, that's why you do these things. It's better for you. All right, keep going, Deandra.
Okay, the investment of trust funds are normally assessed and determined by the trust committee, who is required to act in accordance with the terms of the trust and in compliance with the parameters of the Trustee Act 1998 and Trustee Amendment Act 2011 regarding trust investments. The investment committee will often consider establishing an investment portfolio with a diverse investment securities, such cash deposits, government treasury bills, bonds, stocks, options, and other such securities. The overall investment objectives and strategy of the trust must be reviewed and assessed and customized to the needs of the different beneficiaries as well as the nature and financial condition of the trust.
Thank you, Deandra, so much for all that. You have no idea what kind of serious stuff yet in detail that you've read. I think you have some already, but this whole thing so far is loaded with all kinds of critical information about trustee responsibilities. And remember, when we talk about trustee, we're talking about trustees and anybody connected there too, which are all of you young and budding trust officers, a trust accountant, anybody else who works in the trust. Everybody is impacted by the decision of the trustee. Because when we talk about the trustee, we talk about everybody collectively. Okay? So don't presume like, oh well, that's the other people at the top. No, everybody's impacted by these decisions in one form or another. Notice she says we are to be guided by the parameters of the Trustee Act 1998 and its amendment of 2011. And you can easily go into that section to see in the investment side of things and even quickly read to see, okay, what does the Trustee Act 1998 and its amendments say in a nutshell? And you'll see, it'll tell you how far you can go with your investment decisions and your investment program. Notice also, students, that the investment process is not left to one person. Why? Anyone? Why not one person? Why?
I guess not to really make it biased, but fair instead.
Yeah, to make it fair, to make it unbiased. And what is the other problem typically when one person is in charge of stuff? They tend to do little sneaky stuff, don't they? Not everyone. Plus, if you're acting individually, your decision is final, and that final decision by one person may not be the ideal decision. Okay. And certainly when you're managing a trust, we don't want that, like, I'm the king kind of attitude. That's why these things go to committee with people from different perspectives. Everybody sits down, put their input in, and then a final decision is taken as to which direction to go. Also, that's in terms of the decision-making process by committee. Okay? The other thing that occurs is, with regards to investments, is what kind of things are we going to invest in? If we're making cash deposits as part of our investment, which bank will we put our money in? How much? What percentage? Okay. Are we gonna invest in some safe government treasury bills that can be easily converted to cash if we need it? Certainly protected because they're government treasury bills and they're not in jeopardy. Bonds, for example, should we invest in bonds for steady flow of income coming into the trust? Should we buy some securities to increase our capital position? Should we buy more stock to increase our capital position in the trust? Should we take a chance on stock options? That might be a little spooky. Nobody wants to do that, messing around stock options for funds that you're trying to protect and preserve. Okay? But the point is that the investment manager, along with his other hired investment managers to do the work for him, must make sure that the assets are properly divided into various different categories for investment purposes so that the company, the trustee, for example, does not put all of his or her eggs in one basket. We have some in cash, some in securities, some in bonds, some in real estate, some in whatever the investment is. They must be safe havens and diversified, more than one form of asset. For example, if the stock market crashes, you still have money in the bank and the cash deposits, you still have your bonds that are hanging in paying regular interest payments and so on. The key is from an trustee investment perspective is not to put all the eggs in one basket. That's never good anyway. Putting all the eggs in one basket. Because if the basket slips, all of the eggs get broken. And again, a reminder, first of all, there must be an investment objective in writing, preferably. And secondly, so that the trustee can prove that they're taking prudent steps. And then secondly, the trust assets must be reviewed and the investments assessed regularly. Because remember, if you leave people alone too long, they start to get creative. Not everybody, but too many already. For sure. All right. Thank you very much, Deandra, for that insight.
You're welcome.
For sure. All right. So, are we done with investments? No. You think after all that, you'd say we're done with investments, but we're not done. Okay? More is said about the trustee committee. More is said about the care factor that the trustee must take. And more is said about some other interesting things that you think, really? Like, when are we going to end the discussion on investment? Well, you might be interested to know that although there are some very key things in this particular module we're looking at tonight, it's not everything, but it does have some very key stuff that is fundamental to the process. Okay, for sure. Okay. So, Siobhan, are you still there?
I am.
Hey, Siobhan, why don't you pick up our little discussion then beginning? It is important that the trustee committee.
It is important that the trustee committee understand the nature of the securities within their trust investment portfolio, as this knowledge will greatly assist in the overall management of the trust investment and ensure that such investments are made in accordance with the investment objective and goals of the trust. Where necessary, investment advisors may be engaged by the trust to advise on and manage the trust investment portfolio. Care should be taken in the selection and supervision of the investment advisor in order to be afforded the statutory protection of Trustee Act 1998. It is important that when the trustees delegate these responsibilities for investment, advice, and management on behalf of the trust, they do so with the utmost prudence and skill, as the ultimate responsibility for the protection and preservation of trust property is still theirs. Additionally, trustees must ensure that the trust fund is not charged excessively or doubly for the investment advisory and management fees, particularly where an affiliate company or department of the same professional trustee carries out the functions of investment advisory and/or management services. If this case exists, it is recommended that the value in the trust assets in the investment fund be excluded from the calculation of the other trust assets when trustee fees are being determined. In addition to the proper selection and supervision of investment advisors on behalf of the trustees should obtain the relevant tax opinion as and where necessary, subject to the provisions within the trust instrument in order to minimize any negative impact that certain taxes may have on income generation, capital growth, or the distribution of income or capital to certain beneficiaries in certain tax jurisdictions.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. Okay, um, in those paragraphs, again, stands a whole lot of wild and crazy stuff that trustees need to be aware of. And now perhaps you're appreciating even more than before the reason why they make the big bucks, because trustees obviously carry a huge responsibility when they take on these assets into the trust and agree to manage them. And sure. And so, yeah, the committee is there to make decisions as a group to make sure that the portfolio stands in the best possible form and to properly manage the whole process, which, by the way, might not be well done by a single person anyway, who might just have a very limited perspective in how things should be done. Okay? If the trustee needs investment advisors, he must be able to support the reason for the investment advisors and then go ahead and get them and pay them out of the trust fund. Of course, value for money is always important. And even though a trust may have gazillions of dollars in it, that doesn't mean they may not be pinching pennies somewhere to make sure that they always get value for money. Notice if you're selecting an investment advisor, you are told, trustee, exercise great care. Don't just go and grab anybody off the street. Some reference from somebody you know over having a drink somewhere after work the day before. Don't do that. Be prudent. See, comes right back to that. Exercise care. That a prudent man would say, "This is not my money." That's what wise people do. That's what good decisions are about. This is not my money. I'm going to take advice on the references that are made to me to make sure that there are no negative reports coming with regards to these advices that I'm seeking to help me. Okay? And these are and notice, you are told as trustees, if you want to benefit from the law, which is what we refer to as statutory protection by way of the act, then you need to know what's in the act and then take steps to follow the program. Okay? Remember also, the act allows for trustee delegation of investment activity, but delegation does not mean that you don't have responsibility anymore. You may delegate it to investment advisors, you may delegate it to investment managers, or both. But at the end of the day, if something goes wrong, you can't say, well, it's their responsibility. You could say it, but nobody's going to be hearing you from a beneficiary perspective. And when the lawyers come in again, they love to lawyer up. When the lawyers come in, the lawyers are going, one of the first things a keen lawyer will do is look to see whether these things are in place. To see whether the trustee exercised good judgment, prudence, skill, and getting these people to invest the trust assets, for sure. One of the other things that's interestingly enough came up later in her discussion where she said that The trustee must also make sure that the fund is not charged excessively or doubly for investment advisory and the other services. Question for the class. Why, what, especially with a multi-million-dollar trust, why should they be checking for these kinds of little quote-unquote itsy-bitsy charges? But then all the charges are not itsy-bitsy. What's the concern about excessive charge? Anyone? Why would that be a concern and why might that happen?
I think the obvious concern is the trust is losing money.
Yeah. The trust is
Um,
losing money for any expense that you have to pay.
And I think sometimes if you like in contracts, sometimes, um, especially with a higher value trust, it's not really a set figure that's determined. It's a percentage of whatever the value is. So you might have an excessive percentage that causes you to lose a lot more than you wanted to.
By all means. And that excess could be market driven or it could be artificially driven by an individual. Because remember, for example, people who clean the yard, they could go to one property that's the same size as another property. And let's say the property is an area where housing values are not very high. So they go into that property and they give a quote. The quote will usually be commensurate with oftentimes the location of the property. Then they come into a very high-end property where people look like they have a lot of money to play around with and so on. And suddenly the same size yard carries 3 or 4 times the amount to do it. Why? Why do people do that? Well, they do that as a matter of perception. And trustees and trust activity and trust investment are no different. We have to be careful with our perceptions. Because remember, at the end of the day, if those perceptions are wrong and they go wrong, it's not your money you're playing with. It belongs to other people. OPP. Anybody remember that song? OPP? No? Who remembers OPP?
Yeah, over here laughing.
Okay, who's the one who laughed?
I think everyone is laughing at this point.
OPP. Yeah.
Yeah, you know me.
Yeah. For those of you too young to remember the song OPP, yeah, OPP, OPP back in those days meant other people's property, but they were not talking about trust assets, were they? Okay.
I
Not at
mean,
all.
assets, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kiss my friend. Yeah, they certainly was talking about assets. Indeed, indeed. So those of you who are too young to remember, go to YouTube or something, see if you can dig it up and listen to the song OPP. And when you come back on Saturday, that's your homework. Tell us what you found under OPP. Doggone it. That should be interesting. Okay, OPP. All right. Okay, there we go. I'm down with OPP. Okay. So the trustee cannot do the OPP thing because they have other people's property, and that other people's property that are called beneficiaries, and some beneficiaries are much meaner than others and much less forgiving than others, and these are realities. Trustees around the world are oftentimes sued all the time, sometimes legitimately and sometimes not so legitimately. Point is, anytime a lawsuit comes, they have to deal with it whether they think they're innocent or not, and whether they're actually innocent or not. Still have to deal with it to the very end. And basically, who wants to deal with a lawsuit? Even if you win, word gets out that somebody sued you, nobody gives the details about why. And sometimes you don't even get the details that you want. The only thing people hear is you were sued. And they stop listening after that. All right, so it's a reputational problem as well. Okay, thanks, Siobhan. So let's see, Leah, are you still in the room?
Yes, I am.
Okay, excellent, Leah. We're into the final phase of this discussion on investments and OPP. Since I was a real topic. And so, but this time, we're looking at it from the protection side, which is the terms and conditions of investment powers as outlined in the Bahamas Trustee Act of 1998. And of course, if a trustee is governed by the laws of the Commonwealth of Bahamas, then the trust is also governed, in addition to the trustee, by the Trustee Act. Let me just say this before Leah begins. What do you think at this stage of your young life in trust and trust studies is the primary source for the trustee to consult in any trust matter? Whatever comes up or whatever is required, what should the trustee consult first and foremost? Before you do anything else, what should you consult first and foremost? Well, you'd be shocked to know that it's actually the trust deed. Okay? No matter what anybody tells you, no matter what happens around you as a trustee, trust administrator, trust officer, when a matter comes up for you to act on in any form or fashion, whether it's a power, whether it's a payment, whatever the situation is, if you are not absolutely sure about what to do, the first place you should go is to your trustee, because that deed will tell you whether you have the ability to do it or not. Sometimes some trustees get so comfortable that they don't consult the deed. They just go ahead and make a decision from the hip. And then something goes wrong, ends up in court. Guess who's going to look at the deed? The judge and the lawyers for the beneficiaries who are suing you. And then you'll have to say to yourself, if only I had listened to Mr. Wilkinson all the way back in 2023, I wouldn't be in this mess. And if he were alive, I would send him a text and tell him, see, like that. That's the position you do not want to be in. Okay, for sure. Right? Okay, Leah, let it rip.
I'm starting at investment powers in the Bahamas Trustee Act, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. A trustee may incorporate by reference into a trust instrument any of the provisions set out in the first schedule of the Trustee Act unless a contrary intention appears in the trust instrument. The provision set out in the Trustee Act, which may be incorporated as the investment clause, is as follows. In the management and administration of the trust fund for the benefit of the beneficiaries, the trustees shall have the widest powers of investing, disposing of, and dealing with the trust fund, and of carrying out any transaction whatever in connection with the trust fund, which is lawfully capable of being performed by beneficial owners to the same effect as if such powers were expressly conferred by this instrument and specified in extenso, and such powers shall include, but are not limited to, investment in the purchase of or upon the security of such common or preferred stocks, shares, mutual fund shares, unit trust units, or other securities or commodities, including precious metals, bonds, notes, debentures, certificates of deposit or time deposits, derivatives, securities, land, or other investment or property of whatever nature, and whether or not income producing or paying dividends or interest, and whether involving liabilities or not, or upon such personal credit with or without security as the trustees in their absolute discretion think fit, and the trustees may exercise or omit to exercise all or any of such powers in their absolute and uncontrolled discretion as if they were the absolute beneficial owners of the trust fund. In
Wow.
addition,
Yeah,
it's a lot.
all of that is under the Trustee Act?
So they say.
Yeah, it is. And and you don't have, you can just go to the act and you'll see it sitting right there. But again, remember the act is the statutory document, not the trustee, but it's the statutory or legal document that will protect the trustee if they are sued, but they can prove that they acted in accordance either with the trustee or the trustee act or both, and then ward off the suit and probably even win the case. Okay, but they have to be able to show that they acted in accordance with the deed and or the trustee act. Okay, keep going.
In addition to the clause set out in the trust instrument, Section 4 of the Trustee Act 1998 gives trustees full powers of investing and of changing investments as any beneficial owner who is absolutely entitled, which will be exercised at the discretion of the trustees and in addition or subject to the provisions within the trust instrument. Section 5 of the Trustee Act 1998 gives the trustees guidance on the exercise of the power of investment and requires trustees to make, change, and retain investments as a prudent investor would, which narrows the general standard of care of a prudent man of business. In making investments, trustees should consider the following. First, exercise reasonable care, caution, and skill that an ordinary person would. Second, have regard to the suitability of trust investments in the context of the whole of the trust property, with a view to obtaining an overall balance of risk and return reasonably suited to the trust. And third, have regard to the need for diversification of investment so far as the trustees consider it appropriate to the trust. Section 5.2 outlines the considerations that the trustees must have in relation to deciding whether certain investments are appropriate for a particular trust, including the size of the trust property, general economic conditions, and the intentions and wishes of the settlor. In Cowan versus Scargill, the question arose whether in selecting investments, trustees were entitled to consider non-financial matters. It was held that the trustees were in breach of trust if they failed to adopt the recommended investment strategy. Their duty was to act in the best interest of the beneficiary present and future. The power of investment ought to be exercised in such a way as to yield the best financial return by way of income and capital appreciation. Under Section 6 of the Act, trustees are not only empowered to select certain persons to provide investment advice and expertise to the trust, provided that they have the requisite knowledge, experience, and skill, but they may also be protected under law for any loss suffered by the trustee in reliance on the advice of the selected investment advisor. Similarly, Section 13 of the Trustee Amendment Act 2011 allows a trustee the protection of law for any liability for loss occasioned by the trust, where such trustee has acted on the instructions or directions of a power holder or failed to act in the absence of a direction from a power holder with responsibility for investment. Additionally, with regard to legal protections under the law, a trustee will only be afforded such protections if they have properly discharged their obligations with regard to their selection or appointment of the investment advisor and the continuing supervision of such advisors to ensure that such agents act in accordance with the provisions of the trust and with the same objective of preserving and protecting trust property from needless loss. Therefore, while the trustee takes advice from the investment advisor, the investment decisions are still made in their name, and the trustees are answerable to the beneficiary.
Wow, stick a pin for 1 second. So the trustee may delegate. This is just so crucial for the trustee in general and the trustee when it comes to investments. The trustee may delegate the responsibility for investment programs to any investment manager or managers that he wants. However, if something goes wrong, the trustee cannot get away with saying, well, it's not my fault. It's the investment manager's fault. Because you see, the problem that the trustee has and will always have and always had in the past is that they can delegate functions, but they cannot delegate responsibility. Okay? Very serious distinction. And so when the trustee delegates investment assets to these guys to invest appropriately, something goes wrong, the trustee will have to take direct responsibility. Now, the trustee does have the right to sue the investment managers if they feel that they really acted imprudently and wild and crazy, and maybe even illegally, God forbid, or fraudulently, or whatever the case might be. But that's the other matter, that's a separate suit. Trustee can pursue that after dealing with the suit that will come from beneficiaries by taking responsibility for investments that have gone wrong. Okay. All right, keep going, Leo.
Once the trustee properly appoints and supervises the agents to whom he may delegate investment tasks, he may seek protection against liability for loss suffered by the trust due to actions of these third parties. Implicit in discharging their investments powers within the trust instrument or under the act, a trustee must ensure that proper investment objectives are made and an investment strategy is created to invest trust property for the specific trust that he is administering. This is often done by the trust committee for a professional trustee. Once the investment strategy has been created and executed, the trustee must ensure that there are periodic reviews of the investments and the investment strategy in order to detect any changes in such investments which may cause loss. Investment management activities are usually conducted by stockbrokers, banks, trust accountants, or insurance companies. These service providers should be licensed to undertake this business. Other requirements is an experienced workforce, detailed procedures and research facilities, segregation of function, technology, and suitable premises. As part of an investment advisor's compliance obligation, the advisor will start with agreeing the investment allocation model suitable to the beneficiaries and the trust, attention to timeframes, income needs, prospective beneficiary, and other relevant considerations, such as tax. The review of investments in a portfolio involves a comparison of the market value of the investments with book value to ensure that profits or income are in line with the expected returns. Other matters to be taken into consideration when reviewing investments are: 1, book value of investment at time acquired or transferred, useful for tax purposes. 2, current market price and market value. Check to see if each investment has been valued at current market rates. 3, income yield or return, important in fixed trusts or where a reasonable level of income is required. 4, dividend or interest income. Check against payment due dates and note made any taxes deducted. 5, strategy or objectives. Highlight any changes and, if applicable, whether the strategy or objectives is still suitable. 6, diversification. Ensure portfolio is suitably diversified to reduce risk. 7, liquidity and cash requirements. Review the required liquidity to meet short-term cash requirements and whether any adjustment is required to the liquidity portfolio percentage. 8, indices benchmark against the performance of the portfolio in the market. 9, funds added or withdrawn. This will affect the valuation of the investment. And 10, reconciliation of certificates held. This can be checked against the trust administrator's records or by the custodian. The trust administrator should ensure that he or she reviews and inspects the brokerage statements on a regular basis and provide the trustee or trust committee with the information regarding the particular investments, the terms of the trust instrument relating to investments and investment powers generally, pertinent information on the beneficiaries regarding their circumstances, and any advice or recommendations by the investment advisor. In summary, the trust administrator should review the quality of the reports, information, valuations, and advice received, and not the fees charged. And should there be note the fees charged? Maybe.
Yes.
This should also include a review of the management agreement to ensure that an alteration is made if necessary.
Wow. And this is just the trust investment side of being a trustee. So those of you who work with trust companies, for example, like Scotia Wealth Management, that has been around since like Kingdom Come, decades, and Royal Trust and other trust companies, CIBC Trust and many others in the Bahamas and around the world. They've been around forever. You can see why when they send invoices out for fees, why the fees are so significant. Because being a trustee, especially a professional trustee, carries a huge responsibility. And it's certainly no child's play. They have to spend a lot of money to hire professionals. They have to spend a lot of money to monitor professionals. They have to spend a lot of money to protect themselves from being sued and losing a whole lot of money that they work for in trust income by making sure, in the case of investments, that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, that the trustee is consulted before any activity takes place to make sure they have the authority to do it, that the trustee act is taken into account so that if they're sued by any beneficiaries, that they would have a statutory position or chair to sit on to protect them from potential loss coming from lawsuits, primarily from beneficiaries. Okay? Notice one of the key things that comes up at the end of the discussion on investment is, particularly for professional, larger trust companies, there must always be a written investment strategy. One of the worst things you could ever think about the position you ever think about being in is being sued by a beneficiary, and then the courts call for something like this. For especially if it's an English court or even a Bahamian court, for a trust this size, do we in fact have not only have a strategy, but do we have one that is expressed and written? And if the answer is no, dog eat your lunch. They will devour you as a trustee, because the question and discussion after that will be all around, why didn't you have a written strategy in place to govern these gazillions of dollars that you have a primary responsibility to invest? And so if you find yourself as a trustee in such a situation, you may as well start asking them, how much do you have to pay so you could write a check and get the hell out of Dodge? Okay? That's how serious this stuff is. And that strategy is a very key underlying factor. It has to be created, it has to be executed in accordance to the agreed strategy. And the trustee must always ensure that he is reviewing these investments on a regular basis to make sure that the investment strategy and the expected returns are consistent with what was agreed. Notice when she was reading all that stuff from 1 to 10, a whole lot of things. Now, again, the trustee may not have the knowledge to understand all that crazy stuff that was in that list. The return on this, the market, the development, the bond returns, the stock and equity, the option. Man, some trustees are not necessarily going to understand all that, and they don't have to. They just need to have people working for the company who does understand it. And that's where their investment people will come in, because they are supposed to be trained to understand it. And somewhere between the accounting department and the investment department, they're supposed to be able to work out some of that stuff. More so the investment side than the accounting side. Because accountants are not particularly interested in all that gobbledygook anyway. That is really not the accountant's job to discuss and worry about the return on the investment, whether the bond performance has done better or worse since interest rates went up in the United States, and whether or not the bloody trust investment fund has been impacted significantly and by what percentage point, and who the hell invested in FTX and why and how much. And see, that's the investment manager's job. But all this stuff should be outlined somewhere in the investment strategy. Because just like you have the trustee that governs the trust, the written strategy governs the investment policies and practices of that trust. And that is your third line of defense. Your trustee, which authorizes you to invest and under what conditions, your trustee act, which is your statutory base for acting in protection, and last but not least, your investment strategy. So you can tell beneficiaries and their lawyers and all else who need to know that you didn't go into this thing with your eyes closed as a trustee, along with your investment managers, that you guys have a plan. And the strategy is here for all to see. Okay? But despite all of this, the trustee cannot fail to inspect, to review the statements that come from their brokers and investment managers, And notice not just whenever you feel like it, we're told on a regular basis. Because if they come and you don't look at them and you can't prove that you reviewed them and ask any questions about them, and a lawsuit comes again, you're gonna be in trouble because that part of it will be discovered by some hotshot attorney that you were not reviewing these documents. And though, even though you acted in good faith and they can prove that you didn't, then dog eat your lunch once again. Okay? So, let me say this, and I think the point has been made beyond our wildest imagination. This investment thing that has to be done by the trustee is not optional. It is mandatory and it is a primary duty. Okay? So there's no question about the importance of trust and trust investments. And I think we've kind of looked at most, it's not exhaustive, but we've seen more than what we need to see in terms of what the trustee's responsibilities are with regards to investing trust assets. I think there's no doubt in anybody's mind at this point that it is a huge responsibility, and the trustee will get to earn all of that money that they charge with just the investment responsibility alone. And remember, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Trustees have so much more to be responsible for. And so every year when they write their invoices for trustee fees, they don't have any remorse or any regret whatsoever, even though sometimes beneficiaries gripe about fees even. Why are the fees so high? Last year it was 6 million, this year is 9 million. We need to find a cheaper trustee. And so on. So trustees are not only fighting to maintain their reputation and get the job done, they're fighting to keep their clients by virtue of trying to make sure that they don't come up with an invoice that starts somebody's nerve and starts the conversation that they need to find a cheaper trustee. Many trustees have attempted that in the past. They got kickback from the beneficiaries, and then they decide, okay, fine, we'll go back to the original invoice, and they just stay there and suffer until they can't take it anymore. And then they get to a point where they may have to say to the beneficiary, you know, we cannot continue to operate on 6 million. The world has changed. We need to operate on 8 million. The beneficiary says 6 million or nothing. And then the trustee finally can't take it anymore and say, you know what? It's nothing. Take your stinking trust and go somewhere else. Not quite like that. But that's just so you can remember that in the real world, a lot of amazing, crazy, and exciting things. That's why I told you guys who budding trust officers, and those of you who will become trust officers later on. It's a very dynamic world, and if this discussion on investments do not get your attention, then you're dead. It's very, very interesting, very exciting, very challenging, and for some trustees, it can cost them a whole lot of money if they do not follow the rules. All right, we'll stop there tonight. I think we've beaten the trust investment pretty much to death, and that was the whole idea. It's such an important area of your work and the work of the trustee. Any questions before we break? Fantastic. Then here's what we're going to do on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. We meet right here in this classroom, and then we're going to pick up Janice's discussion to some extent when we talk about trust accounting. Now, we are not going to get into the debits and credits of trust accounting. We're going to be looking at trust accounting from a more romantic side, but it's still very important to the trust process. It's going to be more trust accounting conceptually, and then people like Janice will be responsible for putting the concepts into numbers so that we can see numerically. And the number side is not what we're going to discuss on Saturday. We'll be discussing trust accounting purely from a conceptual perspective, which is absolutely crucial if you're ever going to get the proper numbers and accounting processes done. All right. So if there are no further questions, you guys be safe. I'll see you day after tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock right here.
All right. Good night.
And
Ms.
Miko Wilkinson, in reference to Saturday, I have a funeral, so I won't be in class.
On Saturday? Okay, well,
Yeah.
you know how to access the video?
Yes.
Great. So what you can do once you've done all that stuff and settled down, then you can go into the video and see how much fun you missed on Saturday morning.
Okay, well,
Okay, take care. I'll see you guys then.
you too. Good night.
Good
Bye.
night.